What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is spirituality? Spirituality. Spirituality. How do they diver? How do they diver? How do they diver? How do they convert? How do they convert? How do they convert? How are we different? How are we different? How are we different? How are we the same? How are we the same? How are we the same? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is spirituality? Spirituality.
Hey, this is Angelo for the Diversity and Spirituality Network podcast. In case you're not familiar with us, the Diversity and Spirituality Network is an emerging community of people who are actively exploring the integration of diversity and spirituality. Now, we all have different opinions as to what that looks like within the network, but for me personally, I see diversity as nothing less than a sacred path in and of itself. I'd like to invite you to rate the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get podcasts, which goes a long way to helping us spread the word and to share our message of sacred inclusion. Today, I'm privileged to interview Dmitri Bilgere, a pioneer, facilitator, coach, and author, and an authority on men's work and relationship issues. Dmitri is co-founder of the Inner King Training and Shadow Work seminars, and has led workshops and seminars in the United States, Canada, England, and South Africa. He's also the author of Gateways to God, Removing Your Roadblocks and Live His Love, and Beyond the Blame Game, Creating Compassion and Ending the Sex Wars in Your Life. I'm especially excited to talk to Dmitri and get his take on his own Christian faith and the evolution of men's work today. Dmitri, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm very happy to be here.
Dmitri, I can tell by the titles of your book that your Christian identity has formed the bedrock of who you are. And just to introduce you to our readers in maybe a more personal way, can you give me a sense as to how you became a Christian and how it sustains your approach to life?
Sure, I can tell you exactly how. I was kind of, in a way, a late comer to Christianity. I'd say maybe about 15 years ago. I know exactly how it happened. See, I'm one of those guys, I don't know how many of us there are actually, but through my entire life, and I'm 54 now, up until I don't want to get ahead of the game, but I would have two types of relationships with women. I would have relationships that worked, but I wasn't particularly excited about, and I would have relationships with women who I felt like I could easily spend my life with this woman. This is the perfect woman for me. This is what I've been waiting for. And those relationships would go about 3 months, and the woman would very reliably break up with me, seemingly out of the blue, saying something like, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, but I can never talk to you again."
Oof.
And this, really, I started in high school and went all the way into my late 30s. And why I tell you this about Christianity, because the final time it happened, right? I met this woman. She was perfect. She fit my list of everything I wanted of a woman. We had great chemistry. We loved being together. And then we get together one night, and she starts this breaking up with me. The same thing. "You're one of the best things to ever happen to me, but I can never see you again." And as she sort of goes through that litany of things that they all said when it happened, I had this weird moment. I've never had one before or since, but it seemed like time slowed down, like ground to a halt, almost like in between her words, like, "I can never see you again," right? And there was this big pause, and in my head, crystal clear was this thought, like, wow, no matter what I do, I can't solve this. And I had tried to solve it. I had arguably had the best counselors and facilitators in the world work on me in this issue. I've been working on this issue for 20 years, and it kept happening. And I'm a guy, what I do for a living is I help people get past their issues. I'd actually coached single shy men all the way to the point of being married and having kids. Like, I have some experience with this, but I couldn't help myself. So I'm in this moment of no matter what I do, I can't fix this. And then I heard it again in my head, but the emphasis was a little different. It was, no matter what I do, I can't fix this. And then this thought showed up. I said, if I were God and I wanted to show Dmitri that he is not God, which quite honestly is a point that he gets confused about fairly often, what I would do is I would give him the thing he most wants in life over and over and snatch it away until he was finally driven to his knees.
Hmm.
And so I kind of left with that, like, whoa, what if this isn't about me? What if everything I've been doing to try to fix this has just been pumping up my own ego more and moving me further away from the one who actually can solve my problem, if that makes sense, right?
Wow.
So, so she finished breaking up with me and left, but I almost like didn't even really hear her because I was so taken by this thing of like, wait, I've been focusing on me. Maybe I've had to focus in entirely the wrong place. So that Sunday, I started going to church,
Wow.
and then for the next 2 years, um, I didn't do any dating. If a woman approached me and I could tell how it was going to end, if I were dirt honest, I didn't do anything with her. What I did was I did spiritual work. I went to church. I worked with another man who was a counselor and a very Christian guy. And for 2 years, I just worked all around this idea of basically this prayer: God, give me a woman, and you choose her.
Hmm.
And that was very rough for me, right? Because I'm one of those guys who, if you had asked me if I was smarter than God, I would have been like, well, not much. And I really had to get past that. I mean, I really had, they say in Christianity, you're broken into the Lord. I really had to be broken into that. And so that really has become the foundation. Oh, and by the way, after 2 years, one night I sort of got this wild hair. I went on the internet to a dating site I hadn't been on in more than 2 years. I answered 3 personal ads. One woman answered, and that's the woman who I'm married to, and our 10th anniversary is coming up, and I'm more in love with her today than I've been in my whole life. And this is really a lot of the work that I do with people. I work with a lot of Christians, but I also work with a lot of refugees from Christianity, from people who got beaten up by their religious leaders to the extent where the word God is like a trigger word. I work with them a lot too. And with everybody I work with, what I really focus on doing is getting them in touch with the deep compassion that something out there has for them, so that when they actually do take action in their life, like that day I answered 3 personal ads, they can take the minimal action to get the biggest results.
Hmm.
So that's really how I like to work with people. A lot of times in the world, there's people do like accountability coaching, where you say you're going to do stuff, and if you don't do it, they yell at you. And that's not really what I do. What I do is I help people decide what they're going to create, and then work all the issues that are blocking that blessing from coming to them, so that that blessing can very easily come to them in the shortest amount of time, hopefully less than 2 years possible. So that's really, so Christianity is really the underlies my entire way of life, because of the idea of mercy, right? That's why I wrote the book Gateways to God, which I guess we can talk about later. But I really wanted to help people experience mercy in a way that it transformed their lives and what they experience in their lives.
Well, that's interesting. When you were talking about Christian refugees, I was kind of raising my hand there, silently. And I guess it's my experience, and I'm not saying this is true, but it's just my experience that a lot of Christians have very odd ideas as to what constitutes spiritual fulfillment, for example. So I remember, I'll just maybe I'll just sort of state it there. You have been involved with, you've done workshops just for Christian men. You've done a lot of work with Christian people in general. So I'm wondering, do you see certain, I guess, template obstacles that many Christians experience in their search for spiritual fulfillment? And I know it's difficult to.
No, I do. I
generalize.
absolutely do. No, that's why I wrote that book, Gateways to God. It's specifically about that, because this is what I saw, especially with Christian men, working with them in these men's weekends. Very much in the same way that I got in the way of the marriage and relationship God wanted to give me by the stuff I was doing to try to get it. Christians get in the way of the love and mercy that God has for them by the way that they pursue it. And there's 5 basic things that I observed Christians do that they feel like they're the pathway to God's love, but they're the roadblocks. Just very quickly, I won't go into them unless we want to, but Christians try to ignore the issues in their lives and pretend that everything's good in order to get what they want from God, in order to feel like they're closer to God. But actually, the issues and problems that they have are the stepping stones to God. So they need to turn toward their worldly problems, not away from them. That's number 1. Christians try and get closer to God by balancing the books for Christ's sacrifice. And nobody means to, but we do it all the time. We try to be good enough for his love. Good luck with that. We make Christianity a checklist of ways we feel like we should behave, things we should say, stuff we should do. We try and get closer to God by suffering through our repentance. We feel bad about ourselves. We don't use repentance to transform. We use the Christian practice of repentance to beat ourselves up. And finally, Christians try and get closer to God by having what I call a mercy exception, which is a place in them that's so bad God could not possibly love it, and they have to fix that before they can have God's love. These are the 5 things I've seen Christians do, all in an effort to get closer to him, and it pushes them away. And the fundament of all of those is feeling more mercy, specifically in the points of view who think that don't deserve it. So I know that's a lot to say really fast, but that's kind of the idea.
Well, I mean, the one that I can resonate most with, which I imagine goes beyond Christianity, is this idea that everything is great. I'm in the light, whatever. I don't really need to deal with my own. I mean, I've seen that with Moonies. I've seen that with Buddhists, not just Christians. In other words, this idea that there's something that's spiritual that's above and beyond the problems or issues that I'm dealing with in life, as opposed to, as you so aptly put it, stepping stones to dealing with mercy and whatever word we're going to use.
Yeah. Well, I often think of it like this: that that there's I imagine like this image of a hiker hiking in the desert who's all out of water and they're staggering, and you pull your car over, you see them, and you're like, hey, would you like some water? And the guy's like, no, I know how a person who's not thirsty behaves. Person who's not thirsty stands up tall and walks proud and strong, and that's me. I'm just going to walk like that, and I won't be dying of thirst anymore.
Right.
Well, that's the way Christians are. But in Christianity, so much we're told that if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Right? There's a lot of stuff like that. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have had the living water, right? There's so much about that. We have to learn to actually experience his love through the problems of our lives rather than as a way of ignoring the problems of our lives.
So I know I'm shifting here, but I know that you've been involved in men's work practically since the beginnings in the early 70s. And I'm just curious as to how you got involved with it and how you see it's evolved over time. Okay.
Yeah, I've been involved in men's work. I remember when I was a kid, and this was probably in the 70s. I didn't really get involved until the early 80s. I remember thinking very clearly, because I was raised in a very feminist household. It was a very feminist time, late 60s, early 70s. And I remember thinking one day, someday there will be a men's movement. And this is like I was like 8 or something. Someday there will be a men's movement, and I'm going to be a part of that. And then in the early 80s, I kind of got involved in different things. And it wasn't until I did the New Warrior Weekend by the Mankind Project in 1988 that I really got involved. Well, as you know, this may not be telling the news to most of your listeners, but maybe some. There's really been 2 branches of the men's movement back in the early days. There's what's called the mythopoetic men's movement, which is the men's movement of Iron John, poetry, getting in touch with your soul, working your feelings and your issues, all that kind of stuff, which has really been the part that I've been most involved in. And then there's the men's movement of men's rights, marriage rights, divorce rights, father's rights, stuff like that, which is also very important, but also it has a very different sort of feel to it a lot of the time. And those kind of moved along at the same time, same pace. There was a big sort of peak, I think I'd say, in the early 90s, and then it sort of leveled out. I think now we're moving into sort of a second wave of men's movement stuff that's coming along. Like every year, the average testosterone level is lower. It's significantly lower than a man of my age 50 years ago would be mine. I mean, so we're having a lot more problems with guys who kind of grew up on porn and extreme porn. And it seems like it doesn't hurt every guy, but some guys, it ruins their ability to relate to real women, and or it makes them think that the act of sex is actually watching somebody else have sex with a woman. It really kind of messes with their head. I know a guy, a friend of mine in his early 30s. He's telling me he's suffering from erectile dysfunction problems. I don't think this used to happen quite so much. This is kind of a new thing, and some of it is definitely like on a physical level because of maybe environmental factors, stuff like that. But some of it is on an emotional level, that these guys they really don't know how to be men. They don't know how to, desire, if they're straight, a sexual partner in a woman. They don't know how to be with that. They just don't know. They're withdrawn. So I think what's going to happen for the next sort of version, the next version of men's work, is probably a lot more going to be reaching out to young men around how do you be men, how do you succeed in life, which the mythopoetic men's movement didn't really spend much time on, and how do you succeed with women. So like when I went through, I was 24 when I did Warrior Weekend, and it was all about have a mission of service to the world. But what they never talked about was how are you supposed to make your living while you have a mission of service to the world? Right? No one ever really talks about that. And that's a huge problem because I dedicated my life as a young man to a mission of service to the world. And I struggled a lot financially because of that. What the next wave of men's work, I think, is going to be a lot about how do you be men? How do you succeed in the world the way the world is? And how do you succeed with women the way women are? And I think that's going to be the route to men's heart. These young men are going to discover their heart because they have to in order to have their life work, rather than because, discovering their heart is a good idea that has merit on its own.
Well, this is a good segue to what I wanted to ask. Another thing I wanted to ask you, which is really about relationships. I mean, nowadays, most people are familiar with this book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, in which he talks about different gender roles. He also talks about relationship issues. So he has his take. I wonder what your take is in terms of how men and women differ and how they see relationships with their opposite gender.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about this, and I want to preface it by saying that what I'm about to say does not apply to everyone, that there is variation. I'll give some examples of that. But on the whole, right, if you ask women what they're looking for a guy taller than them, right? That's one of the things. And you mentioned privilege earlier. I'm 6'1". I've had height privilege my entire life and never realized it until recently. Right? If I were 5'3" with an exact same in every other way, my romantic life would have been dramatically different. So let's look for a second. Let's not say women are bad for this. I don't think they are. I mean, obviously, if you're short, you're going to want a relationship, but it isn't. The height, I think, is a metaphor for women want to be with a man they can look up to in some way. Even if you ask like women who call themselves feminists, or who really identify with that, they will very often say, "I want a man who I feel like can be my rock, who's solid, who has his life is about something, and it's not about me. I'm important to him, but his life isn't about me. His life's about something else, and I can really kind of let down into that guy. That I can be led." Right. So if you're not 6'1", it's not all over for you, because what women are really looking for, I think when they say height, is they want someone they can look up to. And I think that goes a lot against what the message a lot of men, especially young men, have gotten from women, which is they want men who kind of see themselves the same way women see themselves, that we're the same, and and our desires are the same, and our wants are the same, our capacities are the same. And so we can just kind of be like children together in a relationship. That we're kind of like, just holding hands and very innocent. And that does work some of the time. But it is my observation, and I think there's a lot to back this up, that many women, most women, want to feel like the man is, at least to some extent, leading, Leading, in their relationship. Now, before anybody goes crazy on this, I want to say, I don't think that happens all the time, and I can prove it because in my own life, that I believe most relationships are better if someone is the leader. And I had a relationship for 3.5 years with a woman where she definitely led. I was 30 when we started dating, and she was 46. And it was a great relationship, but she was in a place where her career was really taking off. She was she was a leader. She led groups and stuff like that. And there was a way in which I sort of softened more to her lead in that relationship. And it was a great relationship. I have no problem with that. And then with my relationship with my current wife, the more I'm the rock for her, the more I'm the source of certainty and stability for her.
You get mixed up with issues like patriarchy and male dominance. So I mean, it's a tricky thing.
Yeah, I want a world where people can choose how they do that.
Right.
We had a world before where everyone had to submit to that picture. The woman had to submit to her husband. The husband had to be the strong leader, and that drove a lot of people nuts because it's not for everybody. But I kind of feel like we've gone the opposite direction in the way at least we talk about relationships, is that we're like, oh, no, we're exactly the same. We're identical. You know, and we're all interchangeable pieces. We're just the same in relationships. And I think that that's an overcorrection, legitimately, to a fear of being forced down a certain path that does not work for everybody.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't quite thought about that. It's not really that dissimilar from a lot of the issues that Bly et al. was talking about with Iron John, etc. In other words, it's almost like women want men to be men. Now, what does that mean is a whole other longer conversation.
Right, and that's our job to figure out, not theirs.
Yes.
I work with a lot of men. I work with a lot of men in relationship. One of the main things that I do is I help men get in touch with their masculine power so that they can continue to be arousing to and attractive to their wives or girlfriends. And because what I've seen is that when there's a problem in relationships, kind of the knee-jerk reaction for everybody is like, okay, get into couples counseling, read books about relationships, learn communication skills, negotiate, compromise, talk. And for a lot of guys, that really doesn't work. I mean, and I know all that stuff, and it doesn't work for me. We don't do that stuff in my marriage, and my wife and I are more in love all the time. So I help men who that doesn't work for, and there are men it does work for, but men who that whole talk, compromise, that doesn't work, who want to keep their wives interested in them. I help them step into their masculinity in such a way that a lot of the problems in their relationship stop being problems.
So we need to give equal time now. So you're talking about what women looking for from men. What are men looking for women in a healthy relationships?
Wow, that's a great question. I think men like to be, by and large, right? Not everybody like to be loved, admired, supported. I was listening to a guy the other day. He said, what men want is a place to lay their head at the end of the day. That's what they want with their woman. They want their woman to be a refuge for them after they've gone out and battled the world. They don't want to lay those burdens on the woman, but they would like her to be supportive in that way. I guess the reason I have a hard time answering this question is because when I work with somebody, like I say, I usually work with men, what I help them do is take 100% responsibility for the relationship. Like 100% responsibility. That this relationship working or not, I'm not going to dump this on her. It's mine. And that doesn't mean that you can't help your partner change. We all know there are those studies that if you take a kid and put him in a classroom and say to the teacher, hey, this kid's a genius, the kid will do really well. You put the same kid in the classroom and tell the kid, hey, this kid's a moron, the kid will do really poorly. And the reason for that is what we expect of people changes how they behave. And that's true in romance too. What we expect of our romantic partners changes how they behave. But you can't fake an expectation. You can't pretend that you expect your partner to behave in some very considerate way when inside you already know they're just going to be a dirtbag and treat you like dirt. Right? And so the way to change your expectations is actually heart level work. It is this mercy level work. So you can break out of the way that you're seeing your spouse as someone who's always going to screw you and never going to care, to somebody who you kind of can hold open the door for a new kind of behavior for them. This is what I do with my wife. I can tell you 3 of my wife's friends have taken me aside privately and said, I don't see how you can be in a relationship with this person because there are things about her that are very difficult. And one of them said, well, did your relationship feel 50-50 to you? And I said, no, it feels 100-0. And she was like, how can you live like that? Well, I can live very well like that. It's more powerful. I'm more at peace. I know that if something upsets me about my wife, if I move in my own heart and step into my own masculinity, I will have more influence on her than if I negotiate some new way of being with her, which she's not going to find sexy. I'll tell you that much.
So my take, having been through your Inner King training with you and your colleague, and also a number of works that you've done over the years, it seems a bit implicit in that there's a belief that there's a spiritual quest that's part and parcel of being a fully realized male. How would you define this quest, and what do men have to gain by embarking on it?
Yeah, what do you have to gain by embarking on it, right? Um, that's such a great question because for a lot of people who are already on that quest, when they talk to somebody else about it, if they do, they're like, you should do it because you should do it, right? When I did my first men's workshop in 1988, afterwards, other men would ask me, "Hey, what did you get out of that workshop? Should I do it?" And I said, "Well, what I got from that workshop was I got really clear on just how miserable I've really been and still am in my life. Would you like to do it?" They always said no. Because what I didn't do is I didn't frame the benefit, right? What's the benefit of doing spiritual work? Well, what's the benefit of being able to wake up in the morning and be excited about your day when you first open your eyes? What's the benefit of going through life and knowing, K-N-O-W, knowing in your bones that you're okay and it's okay? That to really feel like life is a dance that you're participating in rather than a game of dodgeball that you're losing at. So I think you make a lot. It's a great question you ask. What are the benefits? Because we as spiritual people need to get better at explaining the benefits of spiritual work. I mean, I remember one time early on, um, this was like in 1989. Someone had run some of this deep emotional process with me, and I was crying through the whole thing, and blowing my nose and snot everywhere, and I had this huge emotional catharsis. So I had this video. I'm like, great, I'll show this video to people. I'll convince them to do the work I do. So I had a bunch of people over to my house. I showed the video, and afterwards, every single one of them said, "What do I have to do to have what happened to you in that process never happen to me?" And I think as people who are into spirituality, we run into that problem a lot because we don't talk about what the benefits are of being able to live at peace, or being able to know that if you're upset and disturbed and broken about something, you can get back to being at peace. You know, all of us have at least one thing that's truly important to it. That's a longing the divine has put into our heart. That because of our experience of life, we have accepted the discouraging fate that we can never ever have it. Because we can't see a way to get it, because we've tried and failed, we give up on having it. Well, a spiritual life for me, spiritual work, the point of spiritual work is all action in the world, right? Changing your life. So, like, I always wanted to be fit, but I was 50 pounds overweight. And I had tried many times to lose the weight, and I couldn't do it. And it wasn't until I did the spiritual work of facing the ways in which I had become heartbroken about having the fitness I wanted, and truly did spiritual healing around that. And it wasn't until I did that that I was able to turn it around and really easily transform my body. You know, we live in this world where we all think that if you want something, you have to suffer for it. I think that's just absolutely incorrect. I just really, really don't believe that. That suffering through is the worst way to spend your life. If you believe there's something you can't have, or the path to it is just flat out suffering, well, guess what? There's a reason for you to do your spiritual work. And I think that's true for men and women. I don't know. I mean, men and women may discover different things about who they truly are in their spiritual path, but so do all of us. We just need to do that, not because it's the right thing to do, although it is, but because it's the way to get to that life that our heart can picture, that God has touched us with.
That's very good. You know, as I was listening to you, I was also thinking about a way to sort of reframe the question a little bit. And I know that you and Tom, who's your co-leader. I'm blanking on Tom's last name. Help me.
Tom Daly.
Daly. There, I got it right. One of the things that you all very expertly do is you talk about these 4 quadrants, and sometimes maybe where men seem to be underdeveloped in a particular quadrant. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, let's just real quick. We can do this. So Carl Jung came up with a whole bunch of archetypes, many, many, many archetypes, and then his one of his students, Robert Moore, not Roger Moore, he played James Bond. Robert Moore,
Robert Moore.
Was a Jungian. I was getting confused. Was a Jungian analyst who lived in Chicago, who really sort of boiled that down to 4 primary archetypes that really, if you think of them as sort of psychological structures that exist inside of all of us, they're sort of like if the world throws you a problem or a difficulty or a situation, you're likely to respond in one of 4 ways. And those 4 ways are the 4 different archetypal ways of responding to life. So there's the sovereign, king for men, queen for women. The sovereign is about vision. It's about inspiration. It's about having dreams, and it's about blessing. They say that the sovereign chooses what the realm will become, right? It's from your, I was talking about that longing of the heart, that's sovereign. Um, so you see, this is what I want the world to be like. And the sovereign can also bless the world the way it is. I talked earlier about bringing love to the parts of ourselves or mercy to the parts of ourselves we think don't deserve it. That's a king or a sovereign function to bring that kind of love. So that's one of four. You're in your king when you're believing and inspired, and you can dream and dare and do. So another one would be the magician archetype. The magician is about guidance through detachment. I like to think of, I'll give an example of one time my magician came online really well was I was out walking at Joshua Tree National Monument in California. I came on a big rock and almost stepped on a sleeping rattlesnake. Well, I detached from that situation. I ran back. Then I sort of peered over the rock to see what's my way forward. Anytime you're withdrawing to get a sense of what your way forward is, to come up with options and possibilities, you're in your magician. Very important. So third, we can talk about the warrior. The warrior is boundaries, right? The warrior sets boundaries. And many of us have problems with accessing our warrior archetype because we had our boundaries so violated as children, we don't really know how to say no, right? Someone sent me a meme today. It was an Anne Lamott quote. She says, "No is a complete sentence." But that's hard for so many of us to just say no, full stop, right? Well, that's warrior. It's warrior energy that says, no, this is the line. Stay on that side, and and if you try and cross, I'm going to push you back. So warrior is also an important part of focus and creating a goal. It's saying this is the thing I'm focusing on, not all those other things. So it's creating boundaries around what you're going for and going for it. Warrior is very important for that. And then last, the fourth is the lover archetype, which is about connection through sensation. That's how we perceive the world without words. That's like that childlike part of ourselves, the artistic part of ourselves, the feeling part of ourselves. So when you're just feeling your way through a situation, you're in your lover archetype. And Moore used to say that the warrior guards the garden in which the lover plays. So for all of us, some of these are stronger than others. And a lot of that will have to do with what our family experiences were. Like for me and my family, there was a lot of tension. There was difficulty. So I became the guy who had this great sense of humor, which was a magician function, to be able to see things from a funny point of view. And I would kind of see how I could release the pressure by saying something funny. And also it got me into healing work, right? I became really good at seeing people's inner dynamics. There was to save myself. I got really good at seeing possibilities. And so I became a very strong magician. But also in that family, I couldn't really have my warrior. I had to do a lot of work to get to the point where I could say no to people, where I could draw lines and not feel terribly guilty or immediately give it up. So, and then I'd say just by nature, my strongest one is probably the sovereign, right? The kingly. So I'm just by nature a leader in groups and of men and stuff like that. That's what I do. My lover, I've had to do a lot of work to be able to just relax into knowing that life is okay. And for each of us, I think probably the listeners can just feel through which one of those do you feel like is weakest for you and which one is strongest. And that'll give you some guidance as to what you might want to work on. Now, in a lot of places in life, working on your weaknesses isn't worth doing. You should just ignore them and stay with your strengths. But I feel like with the archetypes, it really is worth working on your weaknesses so that you can have sort of a level playing field with these four archetypes.
Yeah, that's a good ad actually for the Inner King training, and I'll post a little link to it in the show notes.
That'd be good. Yeah, for men, or they can contact me. We don't have one scheduled right now, but we probably will at some point. They can contact me about it, or actually on the innerking.com website, there's a free mini course you can go through that'll get you on our list and you'll get notified when something happens. We have found that when men are clear in all four of those archetypes, life is just so much easier. And it's so much easier for them to go for and get what's important to them.
So, Dimitri, we could talk for hours, but I think a good way to wrap up is maybe this is, I don't know about you, but I experience this as very uncertain times. The political climate goes, and there's more complexity coming out every day. What do you do to keep yourself grounded today? Tell me a little bit about your own spiritual practice.
Sure. Well, there's a couple things that I do. The main one is a thing I call King's Chair, which is really sort of it turns out every major religion has kind of, probably minor ones too, have kind of the same process that they recommend. I learned this process from Sufism. It's a process called remembrance. In Christianity, we have contemplative prayer. In Judaism, they have standing in the light of the Shekinah or Shakiri, something like that. And we all have the same sort of process. And this is something that I do quite a bit. Every single day I do this, which is you set a timer for a certain amount of time, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. You used to do an hour a day, but that's kind of a lot. And what you do is you open yourself up to the unconditional love of the divine. And the way that you're going to feel that as a sensation first. And this is one thing that I've noticed with working with people that when we feel divine love, we usually first feel it as a sensation in our body. And then it will become sort of a quality of the divine, and then maybe it'll give us advice or something like that. It's very rare for somebody to hear God talk to them in like a really clear sort of tone of voice kind of thing. I imagine it happens, but generally we first feel like the light inside us in some way. And we want to discover what that's like on a daily basis, and then discover what that has to say to us about ourselves and our lives on a daily basis. So I'd say set a timer, because otherwise you're just going to be wondering if you're done yet, and sit someplace quietly. And in order to keep your brain from really getting too distracted, all these practices will have you repeat over and over again inside yourself something along the lines of your name that day for the divine. Now, I like to say, highest, most merciful God who loves me specifically. Because what we want to do is bring that love to us. Because a lot of people, a lot of times people who study Buddhism and stuff like that, have a bit of an impersonal relationship with God. And they're very calm, and there's a lot of great things about what we're working for here is a personal relationship. One where it's like not just the highest, most merciful God, but one that looks at Angelo and says, hey, Angelo, I love you specifically. So you might just sort of say on each out breath, highest, most merciful God who loves me. Highest, most merciful God who loves me. And then there's really nothing to do but notice what comes up. Now, a couple things will happen. This is different than meditation, because in meditation, when thoughts show up, we like try and get rid of them. We say, well, you're not bad for having that, but you're bad for having that. Don't do that. Just gently draw yourself back. That's not what we do in this kind of work. In this kind of work, when something shows up, kind of what's happening, in my observation is, the things in your psyche will say, wait a minute, unconditional love is available? I want some of that. And they come to the surface. And the way they come to the surface is thoughts or images or memories or metaphors or stuff like that. You'll start to have stuff come up. And so just let that unconditional love touch whatever's coming up in your mind. And then that'll clear it up. And maybe more stuff will come up, maybe it won't. You'll start to feel the sensation in your body, let yourself feel it. Let the sensation do whatever it wants to do. So this is what I do every day. I fill myself up to overflowing with the love of the divine. And then secondly, there's healing work that I do with my clients. I'll also do it on myself. That if there's a specific thing that's bothering me that I can't get to the bottom of, I will do what I call the wisdom process on that. And that's way too complicated to get into now, but that's the thing that I do with all my clients. It really focuses and deepens, because when we do something like King's Chair, what I was just describing, sitting in that kind of meditation, we can still dodge feeling divine love. Because in my experience, the psyche is like, well, you ever watch a movie about climbing Mount Everest?
I have not.
Okay, well, when you're going to climb Mount Everest, they tell me, you go first across this thing called the Khumbu Ice Falls, which from a distance looks like this big rocky plain with the sun shining on it. But as you go across it, you start to find out there are these huge crevasses you can fall to your death in. And they put like ladders across, and they walk across them on these ladders. It's crazy. I feel like our psyche is the same way, that we can turn to the divine light, and it shines on us like the sunlight on the Khumbu Ice Falls. But the thing is, parts of us get falling down in these crevasses, and they're still in the dark. So with this wisdom process that I do, I help people find the parts of themselves, which are often real showstopper, important parts of themselves, that have fallen down into the dark, that I can turn to the light and still, maybe it'll line up right and shine on that part, but it's likely to stay in the darkness no matter what I'm doing. To help myself and other people find that place that, wow, once light shines on that part of me, everything gets a lot easier. So that's both those are my spiritual practice. And lately I've also been fooling around a lot with fasting, but that's a conversation for a different day.
Dmitri, if people want to know more about your work, I know you got several websites. Where would you like them to go?
Yeah, and there's a couple places you can go. You can go to livethelifeyoulongfor.com, where there's some stuff there, done some coaching. Also, I've got a website, dmitrib.com, dmitrib.com. I'm still trying to really kind of decide what I'm putting out to the world. I've been rejiggering my business a whole bunch lately. But basically, if you want to work with me, you can work with me. I'm not the cheapest guy in the world to work with, but we are going to go for real outcomes. And so just go to those websites, get in touch with me if you want to. We'll do a free call talk, see if there's a fit, and see if it makes sense to have me on your team.
Well, that's fantastic, Dmitri, and it's been a pleasure to talk with you this afternoon. I just want to tell our listeners a little bit about what's going on with the network, just a little bit. If you want to get more information about the network, the simplest way is to join our private Facebook group, which you can find by going to Facebook and looking for diversityandspirituality.com. An additional way is that on the third Saturday of every month, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have what we call community explorations around a theme. You could find information about those by going to our website and looking under events. And finally, if you really like the website and want to support it, you can support us on a site called Patreon, which for as little as $1 a day, you can get extra behind-the-scenes content. So that's it, and I hope to see you next time. And thanks for listening. And again, Dmitri, thanks so much for being my guest.
It's been my pleasure, Angelo.
What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is spirituality?